Europa Universalis 5 begins in 1337, a date chosen in part so that players could experience the devastation of the Black Death, one of the most catastrophic pandemics in history. The plague is believed to have originated in Central Asia before travelling along sea routes into the Middle East and North Africa, eventually reaching Europe by sea. In 1347, a fleet of Genoese trading ships arrived in Sicily carrying both goods and a far deadlier cargo: rats and fleas infected with the plague. From that moment, the disease spread like wildfire across the continent. Between 75 and 200 million are thought to have died worldwide, with Europe alone losing 30 to 60% of its population. Entire towns and villages were wiped off the map. Fields went untilled, and trade ground to a halt as communities collapsed under the weight of death and fear. In cities like Florence, Paris, and London, more than half of the population perished, leaving streets filled with the dead and survivors struggling to carry on. The aftermath reshaped European society. Labour shortages weakened the feudal system, wages rose, and the cultural and religious trauma left scars that lasted for centuries. In EU5, in the year 1346, if you are using the default game rules, the Black Death situation will commence. An event will fire telling you that the plague has begun somewhere in Central Asia, and clicking on the ominous rodent notification on the top of your screen will set you to a map mode showing the Black Death spread. Before the plague spreads to you, you have only 3 options. You can build disease resistance buildings, which will bring you to your buildings production tab, where you construct things like hospitals, which will give you a 10% disease resistance in the location it's built. Though the production methods requirement for these are steep, requiring books, mercury, fiber crops, tools, paper, and medicaments. This need can somewhat be alleviated with the second of your available actions, procure remedies, which will increase your legitimacy and stability as your people see you as being proactive in combating this apocalyptic threat. And in exchange for you spending out of your own coffers, you will lower the price of fiber crops, gems, lumber, mercury, medicaments, and incense. This button used to spawn medicaments out of thin air, but that has since been changed to something a little more realistic. However, this is a double-edged sword, as when the Black Death finally hits you, if you are procuring remedies, you'll be incapable of segregating or expelling the sick, with these options giving you far greater amounts of disease resistance. Your final button click is Isolate the Country, though this can only be done if a neighbouring country has the plague present. This will lower your burgher and peasant state satisfaction, increase your progress towards traditionalist and traditional economy societal values, and ban foreigners from importing or exporting goods. None of this, though, will prevent the plague from reaching you. Borders are notoriously porous, and pops will flee from plague-ridden lands, attempting to find safe haven within your nation, bringing with them the deadly disease. When the plague reaches you, your campaign goals and plans take a backseat, as survival becomes priority number 1. It is an existential challenge. The decisions you make to contain or mitigate the plague could determine whether your people endure, or whether your lands fall silent like so many others did in the mid-14th century. In this video, our plan is to test just how impactful the disease resistance methods are, and to make sure that we're in a financially stable enough position to do so, we will be playing as the Pope themselves, who start with a hefty income due to the tithes of all those good, God-fearing Catholic nations they're so euphoric to pay. This income of 62 ducats will allow us the freedom to build the hospitals we need to treat the sick of our nation, so we can get a better idea of whether they're even worth it to build at all. The plan will be to play through the Black Death 3 times, reloading to the start to test a different method of dealing with it. The first will be a control, where we will do nothing to stop the plague. Our hospitals will be abandoned, we will click no buttons on the Black Death situation. The second test will see whether procuring remedies and isolating our country helps alleviate the apocalypse. And on our final test, the one I am most hopeful for, will be where we expel the sick and construct pest houses across our nation. This video will also act somewhat like the start of an AAR, as you guys seem to really resonate with the AAR that I did recently as Wales, and I really enjoy making them. Once we have figured out which method of death prevention works best, we will continue from that point on in the same style as you have enjoyed with our Wales game. So subscribe if you haven't already, and you can further support the channel by purchasing EU5 from the affiliate link in the pinned comment. With all that said and done though, let's don our plague mask and see how many lives we can save. The Papal States begins the game with one city in Rome itself, though this is not their capital, as currently that is situated in Avignon in the south of France, which unfortunately means all of our Italian land is suffering from horrific proximity and control problems. You're also incapable of manually moving your capital due to our papal government. The optimal meta play here is to actually declare a no-CB war on the Count of Orange 1 month into the game, a unique location miner that borders Avignon, siege him to 100% war score, then choose to lose the location of Avignon in a peace deal. This would shoot your capital over to Rome, and you can continue the game with no issues, and I think you can also completely avoid the Western Schism situation entirely. We didn't do that in this campaign because it feels very gamey, and I'm not about that life. Instead, my cabinet was set to improving the control of Italy. Other than the city of Rome, the Papal States had 9 towns, which was a terrific rate of urbanization considering our total location count of 18. This was another reason that I chose the Pope for this experiment, as hospitals could not be built in rural locations. For the first 3 years was spent on constructing the hospitals, which have a base price of 200 ducats, and in 1341 they were all ready. The fibre crops and lumber we would need to provide the hospitals with were within our Italian land, so those RGOs were upgraded, and with our first Parliament session we got ourselves a claim on Siena, as right over our border in Chiusi was one of the precious few sources of mercury in Europe. We didn't want to be too overly antagonistic though, so after occupying the location and sitting on their capital, we peaced out without engaging in a single battle or losing a single pop. I began integrating the province and built up the mercury mine. I would have maxed it out at 9, but the location only had 8,500 pops, and each level took 1,000 labourers. It would never promote in time. I queued up 3 levels to get me to 4, and I was content with that. Another good that the hospital requires, that I was in short supply of, was books, which honestly is a good that everyone in every game is constantly in short supply of. So I queued up 5 scriptoriums in Spoleto. I chose this town as in its province it had both a source of lumber and a source of dyes. Both required goods for books. And also, to supply the paper, I upgraded Spoleto's Papermakers Guild to level 5 also. This good also required lumber, but also fibre crops, which as luck would have it, is exactly the RGO that Spoleto had. Honestly, I don't think I've seen a production chain work quite this well in EU5 before, so that was quite nice. The fibre crops were also upgraded to level 5, and I moved my cabinet member to Spoleto to increase the control. One good that we were lacking was medicaments. And though there was a building we could construct to produce them, the apothecary, unfortunately there were only 2 production methods for this, either mercury plus ivory, or fibre crops plus wild game. Needless to say, we lacked ivory and wild game. I still built a couple of levels in Rome just in case we could trade for some wild game from somewhere. The closest seemed to be in Croatia. On the 1st of April, 1346, the Black Death appeared in the Golden Horde in the location of Ganyushkino, on the coast of the Caspian Sea. This was the start of the Black Death situation, and we took a save at this point to return to for our testing. As this was our control test, we did not want to influence it in any way, so none of the buttons would be pressed. Our hospitals were closed, meaning that they had no employment and would confer no benefits, as were the 2 apothecaries I'd built. Our population on the eve of the apocalypse was 1,030,000. We had a tax base of 63.81 ducats, resulting in an income of 87.09 ducats, though I was receiving no taxes from any estates and we were paying 1.19 ducats for food. The plague reached a Genoese vassal in the port of Kaffa in modern-day Ukraine on the 1st of April 1348, and from there it reached Italy for the first time in the centre of Florence, in the village of Borgo San Lorenzo, on the 1st of May 1349, after ravaging its way through Hungary to the tune of 167,000 pops lost. Usually I see the plague appear first in the port of Palermo, Naples, or Genoa, so seeing it crop up in Florence was definitely a surprise. It did appear in both Genoa and Naples in June of 49, though, and with that I had access to another button I couldn't click, isolate the country. On the 7th of November, the Black Death finally landed in our country, affecting both Avignon and a couple of our locations on the border with Naples. By this time, my population had grown to 1.043 million, but we will keep the original deviation from 1346 for consistency's sake between the tests. By April 1350, I was down below 1 million pops, though the plague had started to burn itself out, with spots of plague-free land appearing in Italy soon after, and Rome itself being given all the clear by November. By January the next year, the plague was completely left Hungary, and Avignon was plague-free too. We did lose a cabinet member and our pope to the disease, but in February 1351, the last of the blight had left our lands. So, what is the damage? Well, we lost 475,539 pops, shrinking to just 556,573 as a total, which was a loss of 46.1%. The hardest hit demographic was our peasant class at minus 48.1%, with the least affected class being the soldiers at 6.9%. I imagine this number would have been different had we a standing army, as the manpower would be depleted by troops stricken with the plague and needing reinforcing, but I can also see this not being done for balance reasons. Economically, my tax base had shrunk to 42.3, which was a loss of around 33.7%, though our total income didn't shrink as we now had an income of 89.5, though again the vast majority of this was made up of the tithe at 77.5 ducats. Perhaps Europeans are paying more to the church to find salvation in the face of the apocalypse. Food-wise, where we were paying 1.19 ducats, we're now paying just 0.49 ducats. Fewer mouths to feed, I guess. So, 46.1% is the target to beat, so let's rewind and do it a little bit differently this time. The second test will be hospitals turned on and procuring remedies. The plague first reached Italy in Naples in February 1348, a full year ahead of time compared to the previous test. As soon as this happened, I isolated the country, which reduced burgher and peasant estate satisfaction, bans foreigners from importing and exporting, though how useful that is when the market centre for all of my Italian land is in the very city the plague just appeared in is definitely in question. It also pushed me towards traditionalist and traditional economy societal values. Despite our isolation, in June 1348 the Black Death reached us. I immediately moved my court into hiding and placed the blame squarely on the religious minorities for our struggles with present scapegoats. Our population dropped below 1 million in November 1348, and the first spots of the plague passing appeared in July 1349, with the last of it leaving us by the 1st of April 1350. So, damage time. This time we lost 420,035 pops, with our new population being 612,041, which was a loss of 40.7%. The largest hit again was the peasantry at minus 42.6%, with the nobles and clergy losing around about 35%. Once again, the least affected was the soldiery, but this time they lost far fewer, at just minus 2.8%. Overall, this test saved the lives of around 55,500 pops, something that, without conquest, would take the Pope around 23 years to recover. Economically, our tax base had dropped to 45.88, which was around a 28.1% drop, and about 5% better than doing nothing would be. Though of course you would have to construct the hospitals in order to do it, and that's not free. Our income was now 95.43 ducats. Food-wise, we were now paying just 0.69 ducats, though we were also spending 12 ducats on procuring remedies, so our balance had lessened over the doing nothing option down to 59.51 ducats. Alright, rewind time, and let's do the final test, and the one that I'm most optimistic about. This time we would not be isolating our country as soon as the plague appeared, nor procuring remedies, but instead we'd be isolating just our cities, expelling the sick, and constructing pest houses across our entire country. Once again, Naples was the first city in Italy to be affected, this time in April 1349, though it remained contained within the city until February of the next year, where it started to spread and it reached our lands. Considering in the previous test we had been completely rid of the plague by April 1350, and now here we were in February 1350 with it just appearing, it just really shows that this apocalypse is not at all scripted and it does happen dynamically. That does mean that my tests will be inherently flawed unless I run them 100 or more times each, but we won't be doing that of course. Either way, when the plague first hit our lands we unlocked two new options. Segregate the infected, which would increase disease resistance by 15%, or expel the sick, which didn't give that bonus, but allowed us to build pest houses, which we instantly did. These cost 50 ducats base, though for me there were 35 ducats due to the masonry and glass surplus in my market, and would only take 30 days to construct. With 3,500 in the bank, we auto-clicked and built them everywhere. Funnily enough, the production methods for the pest houses are fiber crops, which of course we had in abundance, and incense, which wasn't available anywhere in Europe. The closest source would in fact be in southern Arabia. So these pest houses were only operating at 50% efficiency. Instead of the advertised 30% disease resistance, we were only getting 15%, which ironically is the same as segregate the infected would have been. This test taught me something here. Don't bother expelling, as segregation works just as effectively if you don't have the goods, and it doesn't cost you anything to construct. For this reason, we won't bother doing another test with segregation as its main component. As soon as one of our urban locations got above 20% plague presence, we were also able to spend 40 stability on isolating our cities, which reduced the impact of the plague by 80% in those urban centres. This is a high cost, and high, I believe, reward button. and thankfully we're at around 75 stability, so I could definitely tank that cost. I think if you're anywhere remotely urban, like the Low Countries or Italy, this is a must-click for you, and we clicked it in April. There are a few other buttons in here, like control the food market, just to prevent the export of food, but it didn't feel relevant, so I was content with just the buttons I had pressed. Our population went below 1 million in June 1350, and our Pope succumbed to the plague in January 1351. By August, the plague had lost its grip on our lands. Pop-wise, we lost 351,616, which is a 34.1% loss, dropping down to 680,000. Over 120,000 more than just by doing nothing at all. The peasants again were the hardest hit at 36.6%, and the soldiers actually grew in population over the course of the plague from 4,250 to 4,350. Tax base wise, we dropped from 63.81 to 59.47, which was a loss of only 7% compared to the 33.7% and the 28.1% of the previous tests, and our income was at 99.87 ducats. Overall, this test is really the most relevant if you're going to be playing in an urban area, but I do think segregation of the sick is definitely worth doing regardless of where you play, which is ironically one of the only options I didn't choose. As this option is mutually exclusive with procure remedies, I would heavily recommend you avoid this option. Building hospitals is worthwhile, but I think with the production method being so needy, you can spread these out a little and just put them in your most valuable cities. That way you can get 100% efficiency from them, rather than the 80%-ish efficiency I was getting by having them in fully half of my locations. I like this test. I like doing it, and I like seeing how the game responded to my actions in it. I think the spread of results we got, at 46% in the worst case scenario and 34% in the best case scenario, is exactly the range of plague casualties that the game should aim for. So I'm very happy. But this is where I will end this video though. Remember that this is also going to be the start of our new AAR, so stay subscribed if you're interested in seeing where we can take the Papal States from here on out. Thank you very much for watching, and also cover your mouth when you sneeze. Bye bye.